The United States is slogging through a housing affordability crisis that was decades in the making. That's a major reason why so many voters feel down on the economy ahead of this year's presidential election. The shortage strikes at the heart of the American dream of home ownership, dampening President Joe Biden's assurances. The bottom line is we have to build, Biden said. This is an increasingly bipartisan challenge that could bring the political parties together. Hello, and welcome to Francis Comfort News Show. I am your host, Kaylee on the spot, reporting to you live that Americans are frustrated by housing prices ahead of the 2024 election. On this channel, we discuss all things related to real estate. Please hit the subscribe button to follow for more. Shelton can't fathom ever having the money to buy a home. And that's a major reason why so many voters feel down on the economy ahead of this year's presidential election. Shelton, 67, drives an Uber to help pay rent in Colorado. An advance on her pay covered her apartment security deposit, but it also cut into her next paycheck, leaving her bank account dangerously low when the rent was due. A cycle that never seems to end. I'm always one step behind, said Shelton, her voice choking up. It's a nightmare. It's a freaking nightmare right now. The United States is slogging through a housing affordability crisis that was decades in the making. At the root of this problem, America failed to build enough homes for its growing population. The shortage strikes at the heart of the American dream of home ownership, dampening President Joe Biden's assurances that the U.S. economy is strong and underscoring the degree to which Republican Donald Trump, the former president and presumptive GOP nominee for 2024, has largely overlooked the shortage. The lack of housing has caused a record number of renters to devote an excessive amount of income to housing. Not enough homes are for sale or being built, keeping prices elevated. Average mortgage rates have more than doubled and further worsened affordability. In fact, the Census Bureau reported that home ownership fell slightly at the end of last year in an otherwise solid economy. If it wasn't for shelter costs, inflation, Biden's most pronounced economic problem would be running a healthy and stable 1.8%. Instead, it's hovering around 3.2%. Administration officials are confident that shelter inflation will soon cool, but the damage across several years is apparent to advocates and economists. I've been doing housing work for 30 years. The housing affordability challenge is the worst I've ever seen, said Sean Donovan, a former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama years who now leads the nonprofit enterprise Community Partners. Donovan noted that this is an increasingly bipartisan challenge that could bring the political parties together. Expensive housing was once the domain of Democrat areas such as New York City and San Francisco. It's now moved into Republican states as places such as Boise, Idaho grapple with higher prices. It is a first-year issue almost everywhere, he said, and that is changing the national politics around in a way that I think is quite different I've ever seen. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody Analytics, said the outcome of the November election could ultimately depend on the path of 30-year mortgage rates. Rates currently average 6.74%. If they drop closer to 6%, the odds of a Biden victory would increase. But rates moving near 8% might enable Trump to prevail, Zandi said. Given the current housing affordability crisis, higher rates would make owning a home completely out of reach for nearly all potential first-time home buyers. Since home ownership is a key part of the American dream, if it appears unattainable, this will deeply impact voters' sense of the economy. Biden, a Democrat, acknowledged the pain many are feeling in his State of the Union address early this month and in his budget proposal released on Monday. The president wants to fund the building and preservation of 2 million housing units, a meaningful sum but not enough to save the shortage. He also proposed a tax credit worth up to $10,000 to home buyers. Over the past 3 years, he has increased rental assistance to 100,000 households. The bottom line is we have to build, Biden said Monday in a speech to the National League of Cities. That's how we bring down housing costs for good. Rapidly climbing home prices were also a fearsome problem under Trump, who first achieved celebrity status as a real estate developer. While President Trump called for limiting construction in the suburbs, he claimed during the 2020 election that Biden's policies to spur building and affordability would destroy your neighborhood. During the 2019 to 2020 years of Trump's presidency, the country's housing shortage surged 52% to 3.8 million units, according to the mortgage company Freddie Mac. The Associated Press contacted Trump's campaign for his policy plans, but did not get a response. The America First Policy Institute, a think tank promoting Trump's vision, said the key is to cut government borrowing to reduce mortgage rates. The former president has pledged to reduce deficits, but an analyst by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget shows that his policies in office would have likely added more than $8 trillion to the national debt. The best way for us to improve access to home ownership for young people is to get interest rates back down, not to provide subsidies that cause housing unaffordability to worsen. Lower rates might play well with voters, but most economists say they would at best offer temporary financial relief. Purchase prices would likely adjust upward in response to greater demand from falling rates. Construction, the more enduring solution, would take years to achieve and require new rules by states and cities. The administration is trying to incentivize zoning changes, but the major choices are made out the administration is trying to incentivize zoning changes, but the major choices are outside the White House's control. Even as incomes are going up and the economy is doing well and inflation is coming down, people still can't buy homes. That's like the biggest problem for Biden because it's not one that he can solve. The general rule of thumb is that people should pay no more than 30% of their income on rent or a mortgage. A typical household looking to buy a home will have to devote 41% for its income to mortgage rates. The general rule of thumb is The general rule of thumb is that people should pay no more than 30% of their income on rent or mortgage. A typical household looking to buy a home will have to devote 41% of its income to mortgage payments. There are far-reaching economic risks because of this. There are far-reaching economic risks because of this. High housing costs can lead people to cut back spending elsewhere. Advocates said it enables landlords to neglect their There are far-reaching economic risks because of this. There are far-reaching economic risks because of this. How high? Woo! There are far-reaching economic risks because of this. High housing costs can lead people to cut back spending elsewhere. Advocates said it enables landlords to neglect their properties since there is always a ready tenant. Evictions can worsen health and educational outcomes for children and exact an even wider cost on society. Zach Newman, a Denver-based lawyer who provides more than $30 million annually in rental assistance through the nonprofit company. Whew. Evictions can worsen health and educational outcomes for children and exact an even wider cost on society, says Zach Newman. He is a Denver-based lawyer who provides more than $30 million annually in rental assistance through the nonprofit Community Economic Defense Project. The cumulative cost of evicting poor renters are $20,000 to $30,000 a year when you include shelter nights and emergency room visits. It's really overwhelming when you think about the total numbers, and these folks are fighting to have a roof over their heads. While there is a bipartisan agreement on the need for more housing, there has yet to be a significant plan that has passed the House and Senate. Biden has proposed housing aid throughout his administration that never materialized. Had Congress passed some of the investments that the president had called for since the beginning of the administration, had they done that 3 years ago, as he was advocating, we'll have affordability of units coming online right now. Mark, who was the director of federal housing finance agencies during the Trump administration, said that many of the federal tools to increase housing, such as low-income housing tax credit, could further push up the demand without adding enough construction. My worry would be we've done a number of things that increase demand when the problem is supply. But for renters such as Laura Shelton in Colorado, that debate about how to add housing supply is cold comfort when she owes rent right now. She's previously dealt with the threat of eviction and late fees. She gets some rent money from her son, but she also relied at times on her church to cover the $2,399 a month rent. I don't think the majority of us have that savings account, she said. If you spend that much on your rent and your groceries and your car and your bills, you don't have much for a fallback. And that is very true. That wraps up today's video. I hope you guys have learned something. Please put your feedback on housing prices, on solutions that we can do to reduce mortgage rates, to reduce housing prices down below. Don't forget to go to National Income Low Housing Coalition's page to let them know the need for long-term solutions for you, yourself, your children, your mother, father, and who else is affected by this affordability crisis. My name is Kaylee on the Spot. If you have not done so already, please hit subscribe and we will catch you on the next video. Thank you. Have a great day.